Hello, everybody. You will hear some squeaking in the background. Now she stopped. Let's see if she'll start again. If I call her, then she won't listen. Then she'll come over here and she won't be squeaking. That's Lucy. That was Lucy, but you probably missed her. And now she's done with her squeaky toy. See, and there she is right here. She's like, is she talking to me? Is she talking about me? She's so smart. She's so smart. Okay, today, what are we talking about? We're talking about biases and blind spots. And for a minute here, I've got to go back to day 27 and kind of where we left off here. So I have a better idea. Oh, that's where we left off. Of what we were talking about to kind of get us to this point. So I am Dr. Annette Feravich, and we are here in the philosophical classroom. I hope that you are joining me, and thank you so much for all those people who are following me and joining me. Put your comments below. I know that there are people that I have really not pleased, but because there's about things that I have said about people and the way that they treat women in particular, and and even went to equal employment office, and they just, again, as I said, they deleted they closed my case. So same old we see over and over again. And if you want to know the problem, guys, downtown over there that I've got when I see you face to face is that I don't think none of you have come up to me and said, hey, Annette, what's going on, right? Not one of you has come up to say, hey, Annette, what's going on? So it seems to me that whatever is going on, which I think happens to be critical to our community, you really clearly don't care about. So if that's the case, don't expect me to sit over there and make apologies for the things that I'm saying if you don't have the what it takes to talk to me about it and say, this is where you're wrong in that, or here's the evidence, or here's what I would like to say to you about it. You don't. So as far as I'm concerned, until I hear that or see that, must be what I'm saying is hitting a nerve. Or is right or something. Okay, so what we're saying now is that there are certain ways that come very naturally to us to think and ways of the group. And even when you think about this on a timeline, right? Even when you think about it on a timeline, when we're younger, what are we trying to do? We are trying to not stand out. We are not trying to be unique. We're looking around going, oh my gosh, I have got to fit in. As we get older, that's when we begin to come out more as an individual. And so this is, remember what I was saying about that is that is what I believe it takes to rise out of the group think, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We still are talking about group think. What does it take to rise out of the group think? It takes individual thinking. And in that way, spiritually speaking, it puts the onus on us to rise above the chaos of the group think or the sheepleness of the group think. It requires the individual. So remember, if you were in our spiritual classroom, it is mentally speaking, going from the unconscious and just letting the daily grind get you to the conscious. But it's more than that, right? Because if you think about, again, I talk about this all the time, January 6th, and I don't care. If you think about those animals there, they really were trying to break out of the system. But in one way, breaking out of the system to go into another sheeple system that wasn't really about or doesn't represent, whether or not it's necessary is a different, or is kind of what I'm saying. You might disagree with that, right? Breaking out of the mold of that group kind of think, right? I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about with all these books that I presented. So the psychology of persuasion. Robbers Cave, right? And the Senate hearings of 1956, I think it was. So all of those, and then Gina Perry's The Lost Boys, right? All of this has to do with what is it that propels us into this groupthink? Well, it's sinister is what it is. It's sinister. And then how do we break out of that framework? Individuality, right? Individuality, I mean, for a short and fast answer that is based on, a moral compass, right? So moral behavior. So how does this happen? And it happens because we are meant to think in certain ways. Let's take the example of stereotyping individuals, right? So we stereotype individuals. And stereotyping by definition is different than prejudice or different than discrimination. Okay? Stereotyping is a cognitive function, is what it is. So it's our brain categorizing things easily. So I stereotype this as flowers, but I can also stereotype it as beautiful, and I can also stereotype it as elitist. Oh, I have roses in the background, right? There's a lot of things that I can think about when I stereotype these whatever I stereotype, categorize, right? And the thing about categorizing things is that it is a natural function that helps us get through the day. We cannot be second guessing, is this a cup? Should I pour coffee in it? Do I need to check for holes in the bottom in case? Is it sturdy enough? Does it keep warmth? Is it still the same cup today as it was yesterday? Now, of course, we don't have to investigate all of those things over and over again. Why? Because this is a cup. And it kind of looks like this, although we don't call this a cup, right? But we do have coffee cups, and we do have, tea cups, and we do, well, that's kind of a coffee cup. And we do have sippy cups, right? And we do have beer glasses, which are cups, right? But we call those glasses. So we stereotype things all the time. It helps us figure out the world. If I didn't stereotype a good neighborhood from a bad neighborhood, I might not be able to navigate through a bad neighborhood to get to safety, right? So we stereotype things all the time. And and that's a natural tendency. So we have to separate the natural tendencies of the mind to categorize things, good for me, bad for me, right? Old person, young person, right? Woman, man, all kinds of things, smart, dumb, interested, uninterested, right? Attractive, unattractive, all kinds of things. Those are all groupings that we engage in. We engage in those kinds of groupings in our minds, A natural behavior. I was going to give my dog some food. She has food upstairs, but she was running low, and I don't think I didn't fill her bowl. I might go over there because I heard her looking for stuff just a minute ago. So our natural inclination to do this, but then what are the outcomes of it, right? So that's what the mind does, but what are the outcomes? Well, the outcomes can be feelings. Like if I categorize this as a dangerous neighborhood, the outcome is a feeling of fear, right? For example. So that's what we kind of have to be aware of. We have to be aware of where our stereotypes take us. There is, and how clear our thinking is. I'm watching this series, Halt and Catch Fire, and it's just starting where the husband is beginning to get some form of dementia setting in, right? And it's causing emotional swings is what it's doing. And so it's causing him to miscategorize events that are happening as being dangerous for him, right? So we can categorize things and miscategorize them based on, for example, some kind of malfunction in our brains, for whatever reason. Could be pharmaceuticals that there's a malfunction. And now we are no longer stereotyping, categorizing things appropriately. All right. But then what do we feel about it? So this guy in Halt and Catch Fire was miscategorizing his wife's behaviors and becoming angry. So what's the prejudice? The prejudice is the feeling that's derived from the stereotyping. What's discrimination? Discrimination is the behavior, the behavioral outcomes of stereotyping. So I'm surprised I don't have that many views. I want to make sure that I've got this on yeah, it's on public. Too bad. I had a lot of views. I had almost 50 views on the last one. And now you guys don't want to come to my philosophical classroom. I'm feeling so sad. No, I'm okay. But so what matters is the outcome of the behavior, or the outcome of the stereotype, of the categorization. So that's discrimination, and even the feeling, because the feeling gives rise to the behavior. That's when I lash out. I miscategorize. That's okay. But if it makes me very angry, that is more likely to turn into discrimination. All right. So what are we doing? What do we do? Then we have to break out of that mold. We have to think about how are we stereotyping. We have to think about how that stereotyping then equates to feelings. And then after that, we also then have to say, has that then resulted in undesirable behaviors, right? Those are all the things that we want to take a look at, critical thinking, philosophically speaking, especially right now in this class. In our critical thinking class, we're trying to figure out ourselves. In this class, what we're trying to do is think very deeply about, in particular right now, our behaviors that are influenced by other people, right? Okay, so let's continue on and take a look at. So if you remember when we were talking about these studies that were done, this study was about teachers who had false information on students that led to higher increases in IQ. That information was that they were bloomers, that these students were smart. False information actually led to a realistic increase in IQ. These were where individuals were getting cues of being rude, which led to being impatient. Cues, and these again were simple cues that were in word searches, that were cues for being polite, led to a greater level of patience. Cues that were hostile cues ended up resulting in more hostile attributions. Or I'm sorry, they weren't hostile cues. What they were they were impatient. They made people impatient, and they made more hostile attributions later on of individuals who were in a study, or who were in who you were giving opinions on for a job interview or for a job. And then the last one was how fast or slow. So cues that were given about being old, right? Including things like being slow. And that resulted in individuals who walked slower to the elevator as they left that study room and walked to the elevator. So they were somebody was sitting there with a timer, inconspicuously sitting there with a timer. And figuring out how slow they were walking to the elevator, fast or slow. And those people who had the cues of old people cues were walking slower to the elevator. So this is non-conscious cues that are influencing us to behave in particular ways. And so this last one that we have here that we left off with on Thursday is what we were talking about, the fundamental attribution error. So if you remember, individuals had to give a speech about somebody who is a communist. And so Castro is a communist, and we didn't have a very good relationship with Castro. And some people had to get a pro-Castro speech, and some people had to give an anti-Castro speech. Some people volunteered to give one or the other, and other people were assigned. And it was how much did you believe that that speech represented people's actual opinion? And we saw that that occurred the most in this pro-Castro speech that was assigned. And that's the fundamental attribution error. So individuals were assigned to give a pro-Castro speech, and people said they really believe it. Again, I did leave off on Thursday. So what that is saying is that if I see your behavior, I think it's part of your personality. No matter what, even though I know it was assigned to you, I saw you behave in that way, it must be part of your personality. And that is an error or a bias that we make about people's personalities. It's a stereotype that we then leads us to think that's a permanent part of somebody's disposition. A disposition means it's stable. A personality trait means it's not easily changed. So when we say a disposition, that's a stable trait. You can even use the word trait to demonstrate we are talking about something that is not easily changed in the individual. Okay, so now what we're doing is I'm moving into these biases. There are so many of them that are natural biases. We just saw that with the teachers, that when we tell teachers, something about a student, there becomes a natural inclination to treat that student in that, what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of way, right? That actually fulfills the belief that we have about those people. All right. So these are the biases, but the biases that it's not like, oh, guess what? I don't have them because I'm smarter than you, but you have them. No, I have these biases as well. They are very natural biases that come with us as we're born, right? They are part of our DNA in order to help us survive. We have to have, for example, one bias is a positivity bias. We see ourselves in more positive light. And in fact, I am going to be talking about that a little bit more in our critical thinking classroom. But it really is amazing how highly we think of ourselves. And in fact, I am going to get that up here right now. Okay, so here is how highly we think of ourselves. And this is all part of a positivity bias. So we judge ourselves as having more positive than negative traits. So when we are asked, for example, to list traits, so sit down and list traits. How often we ask people to list traits, what do? They have a bigger list of positive traits than negative traits. Positive information is processed more efficiently, and especially positive information about ourselves. So just in general, our mind likes to hear positive information. But then in particular about positive information about ourselves, you might say something like, that person isn't very open-minded. And my inclination would be, yeah, whatever. I have open mind this way, this way, this way. We see those positive things. Why? All the times we were open-minded and not closed-minded. Why? Because we process that information more efficiently. Negative information about ourselves is harder to process and more difficult to remember. So when we're trying to think of negative things, we already have a whole list of positive things we saw. We can't remember the negative things nearly as well, nor the details of those negative events as well. Our brain doesn't want to process them. We don't want to think about them, and thinking about them is processing. We see ourselves as better than others. We see our poor abilities as common and less important. Everyone cheats on their taxes, and it's not a big deal, right? It's not a big deal to, have sex with several different partners. Everybody's doing it, right? So see how we play these positivity bias games on our mind, right? On our own mind. We perceive improvements in ourselves when performance has been unchanged. We do this all the time in diet. We feel thinner. Maybe we lost a pound or two and then it's back again, but we feel better about ourselves. But more importantly, it's like we will do some kind of self-improvement and we see more improvement. Now, since COVID, and since anxiety and depression has become such an epidemic, we need to look at these and this positivity bias. But I'm telling you something, if we lose ground on the positivity bias, you might as well kiss your ass goodbye. And what I mean by that is that what is our motivation for procreation? What is our motivation for survival if we don't have a positivity bias? And then what if a negativity bias takes over that positivity bias, right? We compare ourselves with others using our best qualities, right? So we think about our best qualities, and those are the ones we use to compare ourselves to others. Our intimates, people we're close to, our friends, are better than average. And of course, why wouldn't our friends be better than average? We are better than average, right? We're better than average, so of course our friends would be better than average as well. Our groups are better than other groups. Of course, they're better than other groups. Why would we join them if they weren't better than other groups? And then we see ourselves, as 70% of us versus 2% of us see ourselves as being above average in leadership abilities. So when we asked you, are you above average in leadership abilities? Only 2% said I'm not. 70% said I am. The rest of them probably abstained. Or were neutral about it, right? 60% 60% of the people said, versus 6%, I would be in the 6%, said that they had above average athletic ability. 60% of people. 25% of the people and the top percent in the top one said that they were in the top 1% versus 0%. All right, this is hard to say, and I'm reading it and I shouldn't read it. 25% of the people thought that they were in the top 1% of getting along with other people. 25% thought that they were in the top 1% for getting along with others. While 0% said, I don't get along with others. 0% thought they didn't get along with others. 72% of freshmen rated themselves in the top 10%. 72% of freshmen rated themselves in the top 10%. 78% of freshmen rated their drive to achieve as above average. And 63% believed that they had superior leadership abilities. We believe that we will like our first job, we will get a good salary, that we will have gifted children, and we will be less likely to experience negative events. In other words, the future is great, but especially for me. Now, again, since COVID, we have got to take a look at that, because if you talk about a scientific experiment that just knocked the heck out of my field in positive psychology, Yeah. I'm just thinking about some of the things that people have said along the way about, positive psychology. I don't know. This really could really challenge positive psychology to find out how we really do overcome this. And again, the use of pharmaceuticals, not that it's not necessary, especially in some cases for sure, but being able to have coping strategies like we talked about with Allie, right? And her hyperbole and a half, having coping strategies really can kick us out of the need for antidepressants. And, it's not that I feel bad, because I feel like if there are people who are close to me, that they might feel disappointed, like they are disappointing if they use pharmaceuticals. And, that simply isn't the case either. I just met a young man last night and who was on, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. And I would have never guessed that, because his personality was stable, his emotions were stable, anxiety was stable. And a lot of times teaching so many students, I can tell when they are off. And then a lot of times when they're off, they have problems academically. And then the explanation comes up that I'm adjusting to my medication. So you begin to find out that you can clearly see a lot of students who are acting in peculiar ways, and come to find out it is due to medication. Again, there are also students I have met that I would never guess were on medication, and were, because the medication really is balancing whatever they felt needed to have a balance, whatever it is, right? They are finding it in that medication. So those are all positive things, but we have to be the judge of those things, right? And in order for us to be good judges of those things, we need to be aware of our biases. And so what I would like to show you now is, I would like to show you my biases video that I put out. This is part of my self-esteem series that I have out there. So I have 10 videos on self-esteem. They're all pretty short, and this is a pretty short video as well, but gives you a really good idea, I think, of where our biases can go, and sort of the importance of them too, right? So it gives you and concepts of our, how they are our own biases, our own blind spots that are necessary, but we function way better when we are aware of them. Okay, let's get that off of there. And let's go ahead and watch this video.
Hi, I'm Dr. Annette Feravich from Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. And you can find us on the internet at healthymindbodyspirit.net. And I am here in my backyard in Michigan, and I am coming to bring you the second video in our series on self-esteem. So if you recall, the first video series was on cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is that uncomfortable feeling that we have when our attitudes don't match our behaviors. In order to bring our attitudes and our behaviors in line, we engage in what's called consonant thinking. Sometimes we stop and look at the incongruity between our attitudes and our behaviors. And then what we need to do is we need to bring those in line. And so moving along, this topic is going to be then on biases. And so what are biases? Biases are when we give favoritism to our particular thoughts or feelings or ideas. We're going to just kind of stick with that when we're talking about self-esteem. And so we bias information in ways that will help us feel better. And so it's a really good idea to look at what our natural inclinations might be to bias information. And then this way we can always kind of watch out for that a little bit, right? As far as our self-esteem goes, there are cognitive components to the self-esteem, right? Our thoughts. And then there are also, we call them affective components, or they are our emotional components to our self-esteem. We're going to talk about those a little bit later on in another video in our series. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to spend time talking about the cognitive component to self-esteem. So there are three categories of biases that I would like to talk to you about. The first category would be experience. So we bias things based on our experiences. The second category is intuition. We bias things based on the way that we feel about things, our intuition. And the third category of biases that I want to talk about is that we bias information based on authority figures. So those are the three areas I want to talk about. Okay, so the first area of biases is biasing information based on our experiences. So a lot of times we get a lot of information from our experiences, and in fact, that's how we build our values, is based on our experiences, right? Do we have direct experiences with people who are kind to us? Do we have direct experiences with people who have treated us unfairly, right? And then that's how we get our value system. So let's say that we have an experience where we say to our friends that I can get by, for example, on 4 hours of sleep, okay? All right, well, generally based on our experiences, what we fail to do is we fail to look at all possible outcomes of that experience. In order to be certain about whether or not we are seeing something accurately or not, we want to make sure that we are looking at all possible outcomes. So in the example of I can get by on 4 hours of sleep, as a scientist, what I would want to do is I would need to measure individuals who have 4 hours of sleep, successful, 4 hours of sleep, unsuccessful, that means I don't feel good, right? More than 4 hours, the regular 8 hours of sleep, I feel good, successful. The regular 8 hours of sleep, I don't feel good, unsuccessful. And that's what we do as scientists to make sure that we don't bias the outcomes that we see. All right, so that is the first way that we bias, through experience. The second way that we bias is through intuition. One way that we use intuition that biases our thinking is, for example, when we hear a good story. It makes sense to us. The story makes sense. So, for example, scientifically speaking, there is a concept which is called catharsis. And the idea is this: when my emotions or anger gets all stirred up and I end up getting a lot of tension for whatever reason, that a good way to release that tension would be through physical activity. So going out on the football field or exercising or running, those are good ways to get rid of that tension. And some of those are good ways, but if we are getting rid of that tension in an aggressive way, actually that does not relieve our tension. It actually creates habits for the way that we handle our anger, for example. So the point here about biases is this: sometimes it sounds like a good story to us, and sometimes it really makes sense to us. That story makes sense. But unless we have tested that theory actually in a systematic way, then we might be biased about the way that we see that information. A second way that we utilize our intuition in biasing is that we tend to favor available information. And very often, available information is that information that supports our own beliefs. So studies were done where we had magazines on a table, and some of them promoted IQ tests, saying that they were very good and very credible. Another magazine saying that IQ tests were not credible. Which magazine would you pick up? What we found out is that it depended on how people felt about their own IQ. If they felt like they had low self-esteem about their IQ, they would tend to pick up magazines that suggested IQ tests were not that valid. If individuals had high IQs or were made to feel that they had higher IQs, they tended to pick up the magazine that then supported studies in IQ. And so what we do with we tend to cherry pick. Okay, and then the third way I said I was going to talk about that we bias information through authority figures. So we look at our authority figures and we determine whether or not they are good sources of information. Do you think that this is a credible source for information? And now take a look at this picture. And is this person a credible source for information? And which one do you think is a more credible source for information? Okay, and the point of this is that often we have our own biases about gender, race, age. We have our biases about looks, about clothing, about knowledge. We have all kinds of biases. And so what are you basing your information on when you hear an authority figure give you your information? So to summarize then on our topic on biases and how it relates to self-esteem, remember that sometimes we distort information in order to make ourselves feel better. It's very difficult to change behaviors. And so what we do is we engage in bias thinking in order to feel good about the inconsistencies between our attitudes and our behaviors. This is Annette Feravich from Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. Don't forget you can find us on the web at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. Please remember to look for our third video in our series on self-esteem.
Okay, so I put that together a little while ago, but I really think it brings out, and these are the things that I actually teach in my research design class, because these are the problems with science that always seem to creep in. It's one of the things that is the problem with the robber's cave here, right? So taking a look at the biases that Muzafer Sharif had. So if we were to take a look at the bias, first of all, based on experience, right? So that was the first bias, that we bias things based on experience. Muzafer Sharif had an experience of being with Turkish Ottoman Empire that had a dictatorship and also a belief in a class system, a very strong class system. And also in this sort of dictatorship and this class system then allowing for the real indignant treatment of human beings, and treating them in some ways like, in lots of ways, like rat animals, to train them what? To fulfill his biases that he believed. In this story, or in this, in the write-up on this study, it goes and talks about how often these researchers would put down exactly what, it wouldn't be in here, exactly what they expected Sharif wanted to hear. And, working for that kind of a dictator would be working at all kinds of hours of the night, trying to produce an end product that was biased from the very beginning. So biased from his past experience with the Turkish Ottoman Empire that gave him very specific views about other people who weren't scientists, people who weren't researchers, and allowing for this kind of development of groupthink is exactly what it is. So experience biases us. Intuition. Sharif had the intuition that if I were to pit these groups, that they would formulate groups that would allow them to break rules in favor of their own group. Well, they weren't willing to do that. Many of the boys were not willing to do that. But Sharif had a bias that said, yeah, I know that they will, right? And the example that was in the video was about how we could have a strong belief that, for example, I get my aggression out by, boxing or doing those kinds of moves, right? So punching a punching bag or going out and aggressively, just plowing into people on the football field, right? It's a very masculine way of getting out aggression, but we know that it doesn't get out aggression. All that it does is reinforce and create new mental representations of what acceptable aggressive behavior looks like, right? Doesn't create non-aggressive behavior. It's not cathartic. It does not get rid of it. It's not like you build up your anger and then you release it. That's not what happens. What happens is when you build up your anger and then you continue to do it on the football field or someplace else or punching a punching bag or something like that, you create, again, mental representations for that kind of behavior as being the outcome of getting angry, right? So it's not cathartic. It does not get rid of that tension like people think it gets rid of the tension. You build up the tension and you get rid of it by, repeating aggressive behavior. It doesn't get rid of the tension. It reinforces it. All right? And then we also pick up cherry pick, right? Cherry picking was another thing that we do to bias the information. So if I had 2 magazines out there on IQ, which one am I going to pick up? It depends on my IQ. High IQ, I'm going to pick up the one that says IQ is great. Low IQ, I'm going to pick up the one that says IQ is stupid, right? So these are ways that we bias. And so that's cherry picking, right, as well. So these are ways that we bias the information that comes in. And then that's the only information that we have to use to make our choices. We have to be aware of how we naturally bias ourselves, even when we are gathering information. We gather information that fills, right? If we're doing a paper, we don't gather information that is against our paper and our thesis. We gather all the information that supports it. It's a natural inclination. We just have to be aware that that's our natural inclination so we know where we bias ourselves, right? And then authority figures. So who are the authority figures that you listen to? And also what I've come to find out is how little we listen to authority figures that are women, female authority figures. Even you take a look at, the kind of disgust and people were repulsed by Hillary Clinton. I mean, I get it. It's not that I don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. I just happen to think that it really was more to do with her being a woman and not a woman that you wanted to see in talking to you. You didn't like her. You didn't find her attractive one way or the other, right? You didn't find her attractive. So you didn't want to hear her. You didn't want to listen to her. That happens to a lot of women. So are you, is your authority figure, right? I had a guy downtown yesterday, locally, same thing all the time, telling me that beliefs have no evidence. How in the world could you possibly be espousing something that, number one, sounds so stupid and comes from a position of zero authority? You have no authority, right? But males have a tendency to not listen to females. That ranks above whatever authority they have. What do they judge a female by? They don't judge a female first by her authority. There's a hierarchy to that judgment. And we mentioned this before. So what's the very first thing I will fall back on in my stereotyping? There's a hierarchy to it. And gender ranks over authority for females, for judging females. All right. And there's probably a whole host of other things that rank above that as well, that comes along with your female, which is the reason why people didn't like Hillary Clinton. Where is her femininity? While at the same time being masculine, while at the same time being intellectual, while at the same time not being domineering or arrogant or a bulldozer. She couldn't be all those things, right? So biases for authority figures, and how often, you have to ask yourself the question, how often are you willing to accept a female authority figure? And, you know, even when I take a look at, you know, things that are historically like the past 100, the top 100 people over the top 100 years, and now I'm coming across all kinds of readings about many of these females that even if they were in the list of the top 100, were never even given accolades by the majority of individuals, looked upon, their work looked upon as being, you know, kind of a scapegoat for everything in a way, right? So the fall guy in a way, the work, whatever came out of it, the woman was the fall guy for all the crap that came out of it. So you have to think about your biased thinking, and what our biased thinking is motivated by is it makes me feel good. So what is the feeling that your biased thinking is feeding, right? So think about the feeling that you experience. What is the feeling that your biased thinking is feeding? If you don't like to hear women speak, what is the feeling that your biased thinking is feeding? I don't like women. My biased thinking about women is feeding what? Your fear of women, your fear of losing your dominance, authority, that kind of thing, right? So based on fear. Okay. Now, I have got one more video that I want to show you, and this video I copied from a commercial from Cheaters. All right, so the Cheaters commercial is what I did. So this is kind of where I wanted to go with this. Let me just see if I'm missing anything. No, I'm not. I know I'm not missing anything else. Or I already went there and did that. Okay, so let's watch this Cheaters video, which is really a very short video. Okay.
Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include anger.
All right, that doesn't make any sense. Hold on just a minute.
Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include anger.
All right, I don't know why you guys can't see the video, but I'm gonna upload it again. All right. I don't know if you can hear it. I can't see it there. So I don't know how you can see it if I can't see it. So let me just get this thing back up there again, because it was showing a second ago before I got on. It's always such a good look when you're like, what's going on over here? I don't even know. Restart playback when source becomes available. I don't understand. All right, let's see here. Because it's going to go pretty fast.
Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include anger.
All right, should have looped the video.
Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include anger.
All right. That is so weird. All right, we're looping the video now. So the
Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include anger. Suspect infidelity in your relationship.
always good luck. Did I say that already? How does this not keep I don't know. We're going to loop it and see if that makes a difference. Okay.
Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include anger. Suspect infidelity in your relationship. Side effects can include
for me now and looping.
anger.
And what I
Suspect
want you
infidelity
to
in your
see there is I
relationship.
want
Side
you
effects
to
can
see-
include
I turn off the volume now. Her. What does she look like to you? Right there. Her. And here we go. Looping again. Her. Now, right there. Her. Now that, all right, so we got the idea here, right? Let me pause that video. I'm going to pause that video in a minute. Now I'm going to just, what does she look like to you? And that's what I really want to know. And if you've got comments down there, I wouldn't mind seeing your comments down there. All right. So here's what I'm asking you. What does she look like to you? Because that is clearly, to me, an AI, whatever, version of a human being, whatever you want to call it. So this is some AI video that has been manipulated. It's very clear to me that that person there is not a human being. And so I'm wondering from you about this as we are talking about these biases that we have and the things that we have a tendency to see and think from, from our experiences, from our own intuition, and from these natural biases that we have accumulated. But also over time, what I'm wondering is if this bias is equating to you not seeing that this is an animated woman. So are we getting such input into our system that bias our thinking so readily that we don't recognize that being an AI creation, an artificial intelligence? Well, I don't know. I'm not artificial intelligence, whatever the heck you want to call that, an animatron, whatever you want to call that, a video. See, I don't have that language. I'm not sure. I'm talking about, like, I'm thinking stupid meme, and now that's not, of course, not it. So I'm thinking about your little picture that you have there that is your avatar, right? So, all right, that's not the right word though. That's the word I was looking for, but that's obviously not the right. But created an avatar basically, right? Created some kind of a computer generated woman. And do you recognize that as a computer generated woman? Now, there are real people there, but her, not even close. Not even close. Here she comes again. Not even close to being a woman. I'm waiting to hear the big blow up sound as she lifts her head. So the big balloon doll is now, beginning to come alive after she's blown up, right? Here we go again. There she is again. I'm again wondering if you see her as a human being or you see her as a computer generated woman that she is. I don't watch these videos a lot, so it's clear to me that she's not human. It's clear to me that there might be parts of something about her, but that she has been generally computer generated. She's looking down like this. What? Here, puff, puff, puff. I'm a balloon girl. I don't know. Okay. So that's what I have for the philosophical classroom. So biases is what we're talking about, but the dangers of where those biases might take you into not even recognizing reality. I have talked about our willingness to see fantasy as being such an important part of our lives now, as Disney, and how many students said that is the best thing. As adults, they want to go there over and over again. No comprendo. I do not understand that. I understand life is hard. I understand on Mother's Day. I was crying on Mother's Day. All right. I love you. You know, I love my sons. I really do. And I really do love them, and they love me. And it's just not. It's just a hard time for all of us, as there is for many, many human beings. But there is no way in the world that you are going through the doors. You are taking your journey. You are in no way taking your journey when your journey consists of fantasy. The majority of time in fantasy, in particular, if that fantasy really is, occupying a lot of your reality time, like Disney, right? Or like video games. So, how are you being biased even more by taking or not taking, control over what's being input here, creating the stereotypes, creating the prejudices, the feelings, and then creating, in the end, the discriminatory behavior. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am the teacher, and we today are in right now we're in the philosophical classroom, and in this philosophical classroom, we just really covered a great topic. I just really am pleased that we in this classroom are really covering the topics like this, even though we're doing a deep dive on it. So I'm really happy with that. So go back if you didn't see it. Thanks for joining me here. Go back if you didn't see it and look at the video I have on biases and a couple other things to get you to thinking about what you may be creating in your own thinking that's biasing you and not allowing you to really experience the journey. Why do we have to experience the journey? Because there are things we have to learn, and we will not be satisfied unless we have learned those things. That is what I believe. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am the teacher, and you are here in the classroom, more specifically the philosophical classroom. We will see you here again on Thursday. We are here in this classroom on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Where am I going now? The reading room with a new book. What is my new book for our reading room? I am so excited about it. It is Who is Jane Goodall? I have Scholastic Books, but I actually do have an author. I don't know why I didn't see that author. By Roberta Edwards is where we are going next. So just starting. Who is Jane Goodall? See you in 15.